Science is the great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition. Hi, I'm Juliette Sellgren, and this is my podcast, The Great Antidote. Named for Adam Smith, brought to you by Liberty Fund. To learn more, visit www.adamsmithworks.org. Welcome back. Today on May 12th, 2025, we're going to be recording a special episode of The Great Antidote, even though I'm usually the one who is conducting the interviews. As you probably know, given that you've probably listened to more than just this one. Today, I'm being interviewed, briefly, by Liberty Fund's Amy Willis, the best boss on planet Earth. She is awesome. So I've been doing the podcast for 5 years now, since March of 2020. It started in the pandemic when I was in high school and I had a lot of things to learn. I still have a lot of things to learn. I know that, probably more than I ever have. But by the time this episode releases, I will have walked down UVA's lawn one final time and completed my diploma. I still have a bunch of questions, but as you've probably noticed over the course of this podcast's life, I've had an increasing number of thoughts to go along with my increasing number of questions somehow. I guess that's just how it works. With my departure from the university, we're going to be taking a short break from releasing episodes of the podcast as I figure out what it means to not be at a university and to still be a student. What does it mean to work? Not that I haven't worked. Life is work, maybe. Anyways, we're going to see what that means for me. For the podcast, it means that we'll come back. We're just taking a summer break, and we'll be back in the fall. But what sort of a podcaster will I be then? I'm not necessarily going to be that much younger than some of the people that I interview. Now, does that mean I have nothing to learn and that you don't either? No, but it means that it might be different. And so figuring that out is basically what the break is for. And I assure you, I will continue to have more and more questions and to bring more and more content, but we'll return in the fall. So in the meantime, you can listen to this episode where we're going to talk a little bit about me, I guess, and what I've learned. And you can also peruse all of the past Great Antidote content. There are hours and hours of content on the Adam Smith Works website. And there's a lot of other content on there that is totally worth checking out. So, yeah, with that, welcome to the podcast, Amy. Hopefully I didn't ramble too long. Take it away.
No, thanks, Juliette. I've been really fortunate to work with Juliette the past few years on this podcast, and I'm excited to turn the tables on her a little bit today. So you told us a little bit about how the pod got started, and you just mentioned that you're going to graduate this week, in fact, from the University of Virginia. So congratulations. That's a pretty big achievement. So give us the highlight reel. What do you regard as your major accomplishments while you've been an undergrad?
Honestly, the fact that I continued to do podcasting, I thought at various times that I would just let it go, right? In part, it was how I was going to get into college, and then it became part of who I was, and it's just continued to be such an important part of my life. And things that the professors get impressed with, and ways to talk to new scholars that I've met. And so that's been really cool just to have in life, but also I've learned a ton, and it's kind of weird when you look back and you realize you've spent so much time balancing, even though it's like not a full-time job, it's still work. And I always kind of discount that. So that's that. But I don't know. I've written a decent amount of papers, which will be published, which is only kind of uncommon. I don't know. I mean, like, not a ton of people do that in undergrad. I've had the really good luck of having professors and outside help on all of that. And that's been really cool because I know that that's what I want to do, which I don't think I would know with as much certainty. I got to not do a ton of school. I did a lot of school and I love to learn, but a lot of my learning still took place outside of the university. And I think having those sorts of opportunities was really cool because even though the university was built for that, I mean, I feel like a lot of commentators nowadays are questioning kind of the role of the university and how effective it is and if it meets its goals and what its goals are and what is it for. And I've kind of realized you can have that regardless of if you're in the university, which makes me hopeful for everyone because I think learning is a part of life. But yeah, and I don't know, I started playing Jeopardy with my roommates. I got pretty good at making Jeopardy. I made my students play Jeopardy. I had students. What? I see them in public. Like there are 80 people out there. No, 120 people roaming this planet who I have taught economics to. That is crazy. That's crazy. And I have professors who trusted me with their students to teach them a supplement to their classes. That is bonkers to me. And so, I don't know, maybe it sounds like my resume at this point, but I've had a lot of fun. Maybe I didn't get the best grades, but I had a few drinks. So it's
none ever with me though. I know that. So Juliette, I don't think any of that is bonkers. And I think listeners probably have no idea just how much time and effort goes into the podcast. So I'm glad you said that. And I love your comment about being hopeful. Among the many reasons that Liberty Fund and I are happy to have you here in our portfolio is just that, right? Our founder, Mr. Goodrich, was such a big fan of lifelong learning. He was also, even in the 50s and 60s, pretty skeptical about the role that the university could play in learning, and had a great deal more faith in people taking up learning on their own. And I think, this is one of the ways that we can do that. And so that's awesome. Okay, one more sort of college question before we get to some more pod-related questions. You always ask your new guests, at least, what's something that your generation should know that they don't? So, as I said, I want to turn the tables on you a little bit, and I want to ask you to think about your new standing in this world. So what's one piece of advice you'd give to young people who are going to be college freshmen in the fall?
I know that I was given this question in advance, and even if I hadn't been, and even if I hadn't been, I get asked this so many times that I should have an answer. And now I'm realizing just how difficult it is to answer this sort of question. I think my answer might not be surprising. It's something that I kind of realized out loud on the podcast a few weeks ago, in the episode with Justin Calais. Awesome dude. And it's that we're so small. I think something really odd about kind of having the internet, and not just that, but there's something weird about the older adult. Okay, I'm an adult. The older adult narrative of like, we fucked shit up. Sorry, maybe we're not supposed to curse here. Here, you fix our problems. Like, we're sorry, peace out. You guys are the generation that's going to fix it. It's great. There's some optimism there. They're really hopeful for us. But that is a crazy amount of pressure, especially when that's paired with the access that we have to every single thing that's happening at any given time on Earth. And I think it took me until about last week or 2 weeks ago to realize that even though there is a lot of hope and optimism there, and we do have the power to change a lot of things, no one expects us to change every single thing that you see wrong that's happening on the internet, or to achieve everything that's right that's happening that you see on the internet. You can't foster 100 dogs and make sure all the dogs in the puppy mills have a home and like whatever, and at the same time figure out what the heck is going on with the climate, and at the same time do something about that with government, or don't. I don't know. Like you have to know economics, but you also have to be a diplomat, but you also have to care about the puppies. And that's just not possible. Again, there's so many people in even one town that you can grow up somewhere and not know everyone. And people come and go. And there are just so many of us that we're price takers in life. And even though you can kind of be a price maker, even though you can kind of have an impact, literally one of the slogans on Disney Channel when I was like 10 for 5 years straight was, make your mark on the world. Well, what is the magnitude of that mark? I think it took me until last week to realize that the most profound marks are not necessarily super widespread. Usually they're like a little bit more specialized. You have an impact on the people you know, on the field that you study, on whatever. We can't be everywhere all at once. And this is getting a little long-winded, but that was really hard for a long time. I think I used to get frustrated because people would not solve all the problems, but we felt like we were expected to. And that doesn't make any sense. If no one fixed the problem before, it's not that you can't make it better, but like some problems are not solvable. There are only trade-offs. And part of the trade-off of life is you have to choose where you want to make your mark. And you can't make it everywhere. And honestly, that's probably for the best, because where do you see the people who have the biggest influence, and it usually turns out poorly? In authoritarian countries. And who's the one person who has that control? The authority. And usually it's someone like Stalin. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want anyone to do that. So that's maybe an extrapolation. But I think a lot of things culminated in that realization. And it took college and my whole life to realize that. And I think if someone had told me that it's okay to have a drink because you're not going to fix it in one evening, much less your whole life, or your whole life, much less one evening, I would have maybe not had more to drink, but I probably would have been less stressed out and could have enjoyed it a little bit more than I did. It was highly enjoyable, but I could have enjoyed it a little more.
That's fair. One of our other mutual friends, Russ Roberts on Econ Talk, constantly reminds us that, people at the end of their lives never regret not having spent more time at the office, right? So that's sort of another version of that. And I haven't told you this yet, but your comment, it was in the episode with Justin Calais when you said we're price takers in life. That's one of my favorite phrases that you've had of late. And in fact, you anticipated one of my questions, because I was going to ask you about that. Lately, it seems like many of your guests have, their advice or their answer to that question is kind of chill out, right? Like everything's going to be okay. But, change is also incremental too, right? So you and I have talked a lot about that just personally, right? Like maybe you're not going to solve the climate crisis, right? Or maybe you're not going to solve the challenges of women in the workforce, right? But can you do something, right? Can you live the life, walk the walk, talk the talk, and you might not see the change, maybe even in your lifetime, which is difficult to grapple with. And that, fair warning, gets increasingly difficult as you get older. But anyway, next question, not about the podcast. You recently gave a talk at Purdue University, which part implored your listeners to spend more time reading the great books. What books did you mean? Or I suppose alternatively, I might ask, what have been the books that have been most influential in your intellectual development? Quick, surefire, rapid fire answers, Juliette.
Anna Karenina, number one. Probably the Bible, which I haven't really read in full, but every time I reference it or it comes up in literature, I'm like, this is a staple. So that's...
You gotta know your Bible stuff to be good at Jeopardy,
Oh, 100%. They ask about it like every episode.
Right?
What else? Adam Smith. Honestly, The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
That's the right answer.
Yeah, that one. What else? I really like The Use of Knowledge in Society. Like a lot of these are going to be econ. I don't know. Okay, there's this one, I think it's in one of the first chapters of Capitalism and Freedom, where it's actually kind of related to public choice. And Milton Friedman is talking about, he's kind of hearkening back to Adam Smith, but he's talking about how the impetus, I hope I'm using that word right, is on people who want to intervene to argue for why you should mess with the fabric of society. And he's kind of making this description and this argument about how intricate and beautiful it is. And that, Adam Smith kind of also uses the fabric of society words, but that was the first time I had really encountered an argument like that. And it was phenomenal. So that, I don't know, like a lot like Plato. I really like Plato, Aristotle. I don't know. I'm like all over the map. You should also read Eve by Capo Hannon. Great book. Maybe not a great book in the terms of the tradition, but it's a transformational work that helps us understand what human beings are outside of maybe like the economic political lens, which is really important. Everything, read widely. Range by David Epstein.
Oh, that's one of my favorites too.
Yeah. I don't know. Am I missing anything?
No, well, yeah. I mean, you can't be missing anything. You can certainly have. I think I've told you this. I used to always tell our summer interns this here at Liberty Fund that I would ask them to devise a reading list for their summer project, and I would tell them all the time, listen, no interns ever finish their reading list, right? And they're like these high achieving kids, right? And they look at me like, well, lady, I'm going to be the one to finish, right? I'm like, not on my watch. You're not, right? Because the more you read, right, the more you discover that you want to read. I can't help reminisce too. I read The Use of Knowledge kind of regularly. We'll put a link up in the podcast.
Yeah.
And in part because I remember being at a conference with Vernon Smith, also a previous Great Antidote guest, who is like the smartest person I've ever had the pleasure to know, right? And he said every time he reads that, he learns something new. And I thought, well, I better get cracking then, right?
Yeah. How often do you read it?
A couple times a year anyway. Maybe more because, if I'm doing more conferences, it often figures as surely that has to be the most read article in Liberty Fund conferences. Mm-hmm. I don't know that for sure, but I feel pretty good about that. So, yeah, in that case, maybe even more, but a lot. It's worth it. And, it's one of those things. It's like a quote unquote easy read. You can get through it quickly, but Vernon was right. You see something different every single time you look at it. And that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's talk a little bit about the pod.
All right.
What are some of the most interesting experiences you've had doing the Great Antidote?
That is a hard question. I don't know. I think stuff always takes me by surprise.
Well, good news. That's the next question. What's something that's surprised you in your episode? So you can do it all in one fell swoop.
Let me try to do it all at once. There are a lot of conversations that stand out, but they rotate. What stands out depends on what I'm learning or what I'm thinking about or what I'm going through. It's honestly kind of surprising how personal and intimate it is. I feel like especially recently it just has been. But even my earlier episodes where I really didn't know anything about anything, you kind of start to realize that everything in life is kind of connected. And so even though we're talking about some abstract philosophical topic or we're talking about tariffs or something, somehow that also relates to your personal life. And that's been really weird. But it also kind of means that I have grown with the podcast and not out of the podcast, which has been nice because I said it before, I always kind of thought it was going to end. And it just means that it's a product of my life, which very nicely, because of maybe the way we were created or the way my brain works, allows me to grow alongside it intellectually and personally, which is just super cool. Weird stuff. Like sometimes I get recognized by people who are like famous in our circles. And I'm like, there is no reason why you should recognize me. And obviously that's not necessarily true. But it's kind of odd because it's like, of course I recognize you, but why do you recognize me? And that's been kind of cool. Like some of the conversations I've been able to have because of that is just wild.
Imposter syndrome, right? That's pretty common. We all suffer from that to some level, at some level, to some extent.
Yeah, and somehow I managed to be pretty cocky at the same time. It's a really weird brain teaser.
I don't know. I've seen you being not cocky too, but we won't talk about that tonight. So just so listeners know, there's many sides to Julie. What have you learned about yourself from doing the podcast?
I think I've learned that I go a little bit crazy if I don't have my intellectual fix. At the beginning, I was like, I'm going to be drunk. I'm going to be busy. I'm going to be learning stuff. I'm going to be taking tests. I'm not going to be able to do it during the semester. And so at first, and I mean,
college, right?
Yes, of college, of college.
Okay.
So at first, and this was probably good, especially for the beginning when like I had no idea what was going to happen. I kind of realized I needed to record a bunch ahead of time. So there was never like a big break or anything. But I had a pretty big break for that first semester. And the second I recorded another episode near the end of my first semester at UVA, it was in like November or December, I felt a billion times better for the first time. I had like an awful transition into college. Part of it is my fault. Part of it is college. They lie to you. It's actually not the best time. It's kind of the worst time, but on purpose. And then you feel nostalgic about it because you never learned so much about yourself and other
Gotta be
stuff.
better than middle school, right? You know, I maintain that middle school is
okay. True.
but
at least you have your family and like hypothetically you have your friends, although sometimes they're the part of the problem and you're also part of the problem. I don't know. Middle school is a whole other can of worms, but it was kind of weird realizing that without the podcast or without that sort of outlet, I kind of went stir crazy. And I didn't realize it until I recorded again. Just being able to ask questions in like pretty much silence. I don't know. It's like a very unique environment. So I've learned that. I've also learned that I tend to black out when I talk. Not like actually black out, but once I get going on a thought, I just kind of somehow exit the chat and my mouth moves, which is probably something I need to work on. But it's also kind of nice because then you don't get stressed out, right? So then when I went to Purdue and did this thing, I was like, whatever, I probably will only remember it like 20 minutes later after I sit down again. So I don't have to worry. And then it was fine.
Yeah, I do that a little. I mean, if I'm giving a talk, I'll sort of write it out. But yeah, you're right. Once I start, like, I don't really remember it after the fact. Like, hopefully I followed my notes.
Yeah. Well, and it's weird because there's a high during. I don't know. Maybe other people don't feel that. I love it. I love the talking, which is weird because I'm an introvert, kind of, question mark. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and asking questions, right? That's what we do, right? That's what how both you and I think, are inclined intellectually. It's what we do at Liberty Fund, right? I mean, we say all the time, we don't have an objective. Conversation is the objective, right? Which means people are going to be asking questions, and we might never find the answer. There might be no answer, right? But it's a great way to learn and have conversation. All right. Next question. What do you do to prepare for an episode? Not counting today, of course, because I wouldn't let you.
So, okay. I try, if there's a book, I try to read it. Now, there are only so many hours in a day. Please do not tell the founder of Liberty Fund that I said that. Kidding. He can't hear me, but I don't know. So I think that I definitely read up on the guest. Recently, I've been having a conversation with chat about it, which is helpful because then I figure out what I know in the context of like what the guest specializes in. And obviously, that's not always 100% right. But I try to read the book, or I try to listen to the book, and I listen to other interviews. It's not only important to get the content kind of down and to kind of have like a visual roadmap for what you want, but it's also pretty important to have a feeling for how the guest does on air with other people, because there are some people that just kind of need to be coaxed out of their shells, and there are some people that kind of need to be like put back in their shells so that you can like pivot the conversation. And that's just how it works. I mean, you're 50% of the entire atmosphere when you're doing a podcast. And
Yeah.
so you have to figure out, especially as the host, how do you play to your strengths and how do you play to your guests' potential weaknesses or peculiarities? Because not everyone loves this medium. And yet I'm like, no, join me. You're going to be great. Don't worry. Because I can yap. So, yeah. But it's a lot of
don't
reading.
worry. Yeah, I won't ask you to separate guests into shells. We won't. We'll tell no tales here. But that's an interesting comment, right? Because we're talking about sort of conversation, asking questions. But the interview format is a little different than, say, like a Socratic seminar format, kind of like we use here at Liberty Fund, right? Because you can prepare for an interview. I think you should, and you do prepare for an interview. But you can't, if you just rely on a script as you might to sort of give a lecture, that's going to be a very different product and than if you allow for some of that conversation. So any last thoughts about insights you've learned about the art of conversation by being an interviewer?
I think this is something Bob Ewing would say, like asking someone what they do is almost always a dead end. It is never what they want to be talking about. How you get there. You can even just ask it in a different way. The same question in a different way elicits a different response and a different type of response. And I think that's kind of an important thing to know, especially because a lot of the time I might play it off well, but I feel really awkward sometimes when I'm meeting new people. So like realizing that honestly, just like being a little bit of a nerd and also realizing that being a host of a podcast or being the host of a conversation or seeing yourself as the one who asks the questions takes you a long way. Like it is not about you in the conversation, especially if you're tired. You can just create a platform and then you can think of something to say. You can get your energy up. You can eat your dinner while the other person yaps. And there you go. That's a conversation.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, couple more questions. What are some of so you talked in your introduction about using the summer break to work on sort of the next generation Great Antidote. I'm super excited to work on that with you, and I'm anxious to see what we come up with for the future. But in the meantime, I guess, what are some of the areas or subjects or questions that you'd like to dig deeper into as we go forward with the pod?
I think I want to try to figure out, and this is maybe not something that will be super explicit, but it might be. But this is just kind of like a personal intellectual goal that I think will inherently bleed into the podcast because, again, it is my playground. I want to figure out, so there are kind of like two strains of conversation. There's the like personal, semi-Austrian, you can't measure it, whatever. Then there's the empirical, this is what we know, these are the statistics, here's you run your regression, tariffs bad, blah, blah, blah. And I believe in both of those a lot. I love my literature, but I love my regression analysis. And so how do you marry those two? I feel like we don't have that conversation all that often because people who like regressions do regressions, and people who love not doing regressions or nuancing them basically just spend their time on the nuance and don't marry them so much. And so kind of figuring out like who the people are who are doing that and learning how to do that. Like, okay, sure, we can't measure it, but how do we embed it in the assumptions or in our models so that we actually do good economics? Because I think I've realized what you're supposed to learn in school, that it is complicated and that there's actually a frontier that we are at that we can move forward with. And so I don't know, I kind of have a vision there, and just for the podcast, that it will be productive in a different way. It's not that it won't be something about learning, but it'll be a little more problem solving-y, pushing through things that don't necessarily have clear answers. Not that anything we've talked about has clear answers. or like one answer. But that's just one topic. But yeah, very vague.
No, I love that. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, we can make the subtitle "Running Regressions with Anna Karenina" or something, but see what we can take there.
I'm imagining her like running, and there's a chalkboard next to her, and she's like writing on the chalkboard as she's like, I don't know. That's
outrunning the train, perhaps, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I like it. I'll be on ChatGPT later generating a comic strip for you about that. We'll see what I come up with. No, I think that's actually a really great answer. And so listeners know, I've seen Juliette do both, right? I mean, I've seen her present at conferences where she's doing sort of mathematical analysis. She's been a guest on our No Due Date virtual salon talking about Russian novels, right? So if anyone can put those two things together, Juliette, I think you can. All right, here's my last question. It's another sort of rapid fire response. And here's your big chance, because all the world is listening now, right? Ooh. Who are your dream guests that you've never had that you want to have?
Ooh, that's really difficult. Okay. Most of them are dead.
Living people. We can talk about the spiritual realm in another episode.
Okay. I would love to have Jerome Powell. Would be cool. Also, Lana Del Rey would be really cool. Who else? I'm trying to think. Like, I don't know. John List would be kind of awesome. Like, I'm kind of curious to pick his brain about certain things. And Leandra Medine Cohen, who is this like fashion blogger in New York, and she's really cool, and she's like really grounded and down to earth. That seems like none of those like connect at all, but in my mind, it's like a very coherent group of people that I think could have a nice dinner party, but I'd like to have them on.
I love it. All right, listeners, get those connections rolling so that we can get all those folks on the Great Antidote next season. Okay, I'll cheat and give you one last question. So, I am a regular and devoted reader of the New York Times Review of Books, and there's a column in every week's edition where they interview an author, usually somebody with a new book coming out, and they ask them, okay, now here's where your dead people can come in, by the way. You're organizing a dinner party. What 3 people are you inviting?
Oof. Okay. Jesus, number 1. Number 2, probably Rachel Ferguson. I just want to see them interact.
I think they would get along well, yes.
And Milton Friedman.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why. It just seems like a really good group of people.
I love that list. And I'm going to say, having read a lot of those answers, Juliette, I'm certain that is the most eclectic group of people I've ever heard. And I would very much like to attend that dinner party. So if you can squeeze a 4th in, as you know, I'll bring the wine. So,
yeah.
Hopefully I can make up for it. But anyway, thanks, Juliette. This has been a fun conversation. It's fun to put you on the other side, and it's fun for me to participate.
It's a little nerve-wracking for me.
I've really enjoyed working sort of behind the scenes on the podcast. And so I hope listeners go through that backlog. We'll be posting follow-up blog posts on many of those episodes over the summer, and then be ready in the fall for when Juliette is back.
Once again, I'd like to thank my guests for their time and insight. I'd also like to thank you for listening to the Great Antidote podcast. It means a lot. The Great Antidote is sound engineered by Rich Goyette. If you have any questions, any guests, or topic recommendations, please feel free to reach out to me at greatantidote@libertyfund.org. Thank you.